Okay, so previously we've seen there were similarities in what men and women like in members of the opposite sex, symmetry, lustrous hair, etc. We've seen that there are differences in what male and females like due to this, the greater investment that female humans have and the greater cost of sex. So it leads to differences between the sexes in what they're like, but also there are differences between the kind of relationship you're after. Are you after a short-term or a long-term relationship with a potential partner? Typically, males and females differ in the kind of faces they prefer. Obviously, not surprisingly, if you're heterosexual, males like female faces and females like male faces, and males tend to like more typically female faces and tend not to like faces that are quite masculine, and vice versa for females. Women generally prefer masculinized jaw, prominent brow ridges and cheekbones. Males tend to prefer more, obviously, softer feminine faces with smaller jaws and lacking those prominent brow ridges. And this seems to be associated with testosterone. The reason why male faces are look male is because testosterone sculpts them into that particular shape, or at least testosterone leads to a certain set of physiological processes which lead to the face to develop in that particular way. But there are differences in long versus short-term relationships, because remember, there's a trade-off here. On the one hand, women might want masculine men because they are more fertile, more likely to have children with them. Again, not consciously. We're not saying that people have in their mind that they want to have babies, but they want to get into a relationship with them, have sex with them. And males who have less testosterone have more female faces. But males who have less testosterone seem to make possibly better fathers. So compared to feminine men, masculine men are judged to be less interested in children, and due to them having more testosterone, they're perceived to have more interest in short-term than long-term relationships. They're less likely to, so these are perceptions, but the next one, they're less likely to marry, more likely to divorce, and have more marital problems. They're less likely to feel a need to respond to an infant crying. So there's a whole bunch of associations there which suggest possibly that less masculinized men are more likely to be more committed to relationships and possibly also better fathers. So there's a trade-off. What should women choose? Women choose the man who has the better genes or the man who is going to be the better father? Well, it kind of depends. Females prefer feminine men for long-term relationships and masculine men for short-term relationships. This was research by Pete Perrett and his crew. So here's a bunch of faces here, some of which are quite masculine towards the bottom here. Some of which are quite feminine, particularly this one, C1 here, very feminine with a very small jaw, comparatively large forehead and quite big eyes. These have all been the same person which has been fiddled around with a computer program. So if when women want a short-term relationship, a one-night stand or something which they don't consider going to last very long, they tend to go for the more masculinized men, whereas if they're looking for a longer-term relationship, they're more likely to go for feminine men because it's believed, at least, and there is some research to support this, that they do make more committed fathers and would be higher in the parental investment. So when women are in their fertile phase of the menstrual cycle, then women also prefer masculine men. So what's going on here? So the point at which they're most pregnant, they may be more likely to favour these kinds of men. Well, there's a strategy which could be referred to as cuckoldry, which comes from the behaviour of the cuckoo. Remember what the cuckoo does. The cuckoo lays its egg in the nest of another bird, and the host bird, then brings up the cuckoo as its own, and the cuckoo obviously kills the bird's other eggs because there will be competition for food for it, so it's the only baby in the nest that's getting food. And similarly, it could be a strategy which some female animals adopt, and female humans and males will adopt this strategy too. A strategy is basically one, maybe is obvious now, of having sex with one person, then having sex with somebody else, and persuading the second person that the baby is theirs. So what could be happening here is that the females prefer the kind of high genetic quality of the more masculine man. They have sex with him, become pregnant, and then when they're not in their fertile phase, they'd be more likely to have sex with a less masculinized man, and the hope is there that because less masculine men tend to be more committed to relationships and better fathers, that individual then brings the kids up unbeknownst to him. So this kind of idea, again, we don't know whether it's true, but there is some research to suggest that the females prefer masculine face at certain times when they're most fertile, and this could be evidence of a kind of cuckoldry strategy being operated. Again, let's not beat these people up. They're not doing it consciously. It's just the way that their brains are working. So I'll finish off here, and I will talk more about this in the lecture, about how big human sex differences are. These are big differences. I think in psychology, the average effect size, looking at using Cohen's d, is somewhere in the region of 0.3. So that's the average effect size in psychology. If we look at a d of 0.7, then that is, in Cohen's terms, a large effect size. But the question is, how large are these differences? You know, a large effect size in Cohen's d means it's interesting. It's nearly one standard deviation difference. But is this a large effect size compared to the rest of the animals, the animal kingdom? Well, if we look at humans are what's called moderately sexual dimorphic in terms of many attributes, but height is one of them. Most men are taller than most women, but we all know of women who are taller than men, and so on. And compared to animals such as gorillas, the sex differences in height is relatively modest. So these are gorillas at the top, male on the right, female on the left. These are baboons underneath, male on the left, female on the right. And we saw earlier on in that first screencast with the diagrams that male and female humans are moderately sexually dimorphic. Moderate compared to their close relatives. This moderate difference compared to our close relatives has a Cohen's d of 1.63, which is more than twice the large effect size of differences in sexual behaviour and sexual preferences. So the human sex difference is twice, which is modest, is twice as big as the biggest psychological sex difference. So that's suggesting that although 0.7 is big, it's nothing like as big as it would be for other animals. But unfortunately, you can't get these animals to fill in the same questionnaires that humans do in order to get that d of 0.7. So why is this difference? Why are humans maybe only modestly different compared to many other of our closest relatives? The explanation is it's about babies. Human babies are altricial, which means they're immature. The opposite of altricial is precocial, which means you are relatively mature. Many animals are born with the ability to walk. Chimpanzees' babies are born with the ability to cling on to the mother. So the baby is a chimpanzee baby is much less of an impediment to than to its mother than the human baby is to its mother. And the reason why human babies are particularly immature is a combination of large brains and bipedalism. Well, bipedalism meant that women's pelvises had to be restructured. So rather than being quite round in 3 dimensions like a chimpanzee's pelvis, a human pelvis is much flatter, which allows bipedalism to happen. This means that the birth canal is restricted. So a big-headed baby could not get out of there. And big babies' brains, babies having big brains, means that they need a lot more time to develop to the extent to where those brains are suitable of motor action and what would be normal behaviour in the babies of many other animals. So they're incredibly helpless, simply because that big brain needs a lot of time to develop. And people have estimated, Martin for example, that human babies are born 12 months prematurely. So for a human baby to be on the same scale as a chimpanzee baby, that baby would need to be in the womb for 12 months longer than it actually is, which is a huge amount. And obviously that big-headed baby would in no way be able to make its way out of that compressed birth canal, which has been sculpted by bipedalism. So these helpless babies, it's suggested, require 2 parents to provide for them, rather than 1, which means that humans are much more down the pair bonding line than many other animals. So I mentioned right at the very beginning of the first screencast that probably the most common mating strategy throughout history, in all human societies, was some form of pair bonding, where the male and female are together for at least a few years. Doesn't necessarily mean for life, but it means for a few years, so that the babies at least are of an age when they can look after themselves, and the female isn't the only person looking after the child. So this could be the evolution of love. You want to know where love came from? It comes from big-headed babies and bipedalism, because love is the bond that links males to females and makes sure both of them work together to look after their children. Things may be changing. I did a straw poll from the evolutionary group last year. What we find is that men and women seem to be getting closer together when we look at the original Clark and Hatfield study on the left. On the right is from last year, and we see there that females are approaching males in the extent to which they would consent to have sex after 1 day, 1 month, 6 months and 2 years, but the difference is still there. And I'll have more things to say about this in the lecture. Some people talk about this as being just about social learning. Eagly and Wood say that we can explain all of this stuff simply by assuming that males are physically stronger than females. The rest of it is learned. The weird thing about this, however, is that when we look at parental investment theory, we get exactly the kind of evidence that we would expect to find if parental investment theory were correct. It is a bit of a mystery as to why, if parental investment theory wasn't irrelevant here, that for some reason society would have created exactly the same effects that we would expect were parental investment theory to be true. So it's a bit of a coincidence that we're finding here exactly what parental investment theory would predict, but yet Eagly and Wood say, no, it's nothing to do with parental investment theory, it's largely about learning and society. It's a bit of a coincidence, that, isn't it? So, to summarise all of these screencasts, sexual selection theory means that we are choosing potential mates based on certain characteristics which signal good genes, and they're similar between males and females. There are differences between males and females due to parental investment theory, due to the extra cost of sex, which means that females tend to focus a little bit more on youth and attractiveness, whereas females are focusing more on things like commitment, status and wealth. But again, those data aren't quite as pronounced as you might expect they are, even though they are largely true. Mating systems can affect mate choice, so short-term versus long-term can affect the kind of person you want. And things such as masculinized jaws and waist to hip ratio may be ways of signaling these things. And finally, it may be that these differences aren't quite as big as some people would like you to think. They are real. The differences between males and females seem to be as we might predict, but the differences are probably nothing like as big as they are in other species, such as chimpanzees, gorillas, and so on. In other words, males and females are more similar than many of our closest relatives. We're more like birds, possibly, than we are other mammals.